Find something so enchanting to behold that you are transfixed, ravished. Allow yourself to be captivated. Gaze upon its form with eyes of wonder. Attend to details, this shape, texture, these colors. How can something so beautiful possibly exist? With a steady gaze, melt into the field of space embracing that form. At once, be one with the Creator who was looking through your eyes, loving creation. This poem by Lauren Roche captures the magnificence of our home, the earth. From intricate spider webs to teeming tide pools and songbird melodies, the sheer diversity and intricacy of life on our planet has not been discovered elsewhere. Yet, she is also in great danger. A human centered Western mindset of control of the land and her resources leads to the irreverent consumption of goods. Cheap and disposable goods are consumed at the cost of the poor. Oppression of the poorest of humanity leads to the decay of their homeland environments. We are destroying the very planet that gives us life. Sometimes the most obvious solution can seem the most unlikely. How can we unwind the ecological damage we have done? I propose one answer is this: through keeping a nature journal. Nature journaling is an intentional practice that, in observing the world around you as a way to better understand and connect with the earth. It involves thoughtful prompts, careful drawing, and meditative reflection over a part of creation. Renowned nature journalist John Muir Laws says, "Love of the natural world is the spring that waters commitment to stewardship, protecting and being responsible for something, in this case, wilderness and biodiversity everywhere." Love can be defined as sustained, compassionate attention. When we pay close attention to even the most humble of creatures, we open our hearts to compassionate action. In this video, I will introduce the basic concepts of nature journaling, address common misconceptions, recommend basic supplies, and walk you through one example of how to lay out a nature journal entry. I hope by the end of this video, you'll be encouraged to try this practice. It is a way to become more compassionate towards the planet, and a way by which you can be moved towards action that protects all of life. Before we begin, let's address some common concerns people have thinking about starting a nature journaling practice. Number one, I don't know how to draw. The practice of nature journaling has nothing to do with whether you are a good artist or know how to draw at all. Children as early as preschool age can learn nature journaling practices because it has more to do with how you see the world than how well you draw. You need not strive for total or complete accuracy in your drawings, but rather you're hoping to get an impression of what it is you're studying. And in that process, you're going on a journey towards understanding that turtle or bird or flower all the better. You can train your brain to recognize basic shapes in just about everything. And the more you practice drawing based upon shapes, the better you'll get at it. I'll show you today how you can break down your sketch into basic shapes and begin a foundation for drawing skills. Number two, I don't know the names of all the plants and animals around me. Many people think you must be an expert biologist in order to nature journal. They think you must know the names of all the animals scientifically and be able to label all the parts of your subject. This is simply not true, nor is it even really the point of nature journaling. Nature journaling can be used as a contemplative practice that guides us into a deeper understanding of the world around us by using three simple prompts: I notice, I wonder, and it reminds me of. If you think of those three things while you are journaling, that's really all you need to do. Of course, those prompts may lead you to do some research about what it is you're studying, and that's a wonderful thing. But don't let your lack of understanding stop you. Rather, let your curiosity drive your desire to understand. Number 3, I don't live close to any good nature habitats to study. You do not need a national park or forest nearby to nature journal. We've become so detached as a society from the earth that we tend to think of nature as being like a museum, something that's out there in some special preserve, instead of something that we are always in the midst of. The natural world is all around us, whether that's through the weeds and the concrete that sprout up in our driveways or in modest container gardens. Creation is bursting forth wherever you are, and you are a part of it. So even if you live in an urban environment, you'll still find a plethora of life teeming all around that makes for the perfect nature journaling study. Number 4, I have a disability or health problem that will prevent me from being able to draw, write, or fully participate in nature journaling. While taking time to carefully draw a subject provides a wealth of benefits, it's not the only or even the most important aspect of journaling. The most important part is just simply taking the time to sit with something and observe it and allow it to speak to both your head and your heart. You can practice many other aspects of nature journaling without ever picking up a pencil and paper. Smartphones are a great way to utilize some of the aspects of studying the world around you. I recommend checking out journaling apps such as Day One. Journal apps can allow you to take audio recordings, snap pictures, take videos, and enter notes on your own that can be compiled into a nature journal digitally. There are also a number of adaptive tools that artists use to help alleviate pain in the artistic process. For example, there are specialized paintbrush holders to help with hand tremors or carpal tunnel, and angled drawing desks that can minimize neck pain. These options, amongst others, make nature journaling highly accessible to just about everybody. I hope this has helped address some concerns you might have about nature journaling. Today, I'd like to walk you through the process of just one way that you can engage in a journaling practice. Now, while there's plenty of options to draw and record out in the field, today I'm going to be doing a small subject study, and it's one that could help a beginner learn some of the basic techniques and methods that I personally use in my own nature journaling practice. I've come to realize that nature journaling can be a spiritual practice, as well as one that helps us consider the goodness of creation and reconnects us to the feelings of childlike awe and wonder at the world around us. It can help re-ground us to this earth and help us become more compassionate and more aware of the degradation that goes on around us. It can help prompt us to action and leads us to a place where we care for creation in a passionate way that stands for justice for the entire earth. So let me take you on a journey today towards compassionate understanding through a small but mighty subject study. Let's get started. I was trying to decide what to journal about for this video, and when I looked outside at my deck this morning in my backyard, I saw it covered in these, which are maple seeds, and there are probably hundreds of them, thousands maybe, I don't know. They're everywhere. And they likely come from this giant maple that hangs largely over our deck area. So I'm taking that as a gift from the maple tree this morning, and that is going to be the topic of what we decide to journal today. First, we'll cover some of the materials you'll need to start your nature journaling adventure. Now, really all you need to nature journal is a pencil and a notebook. Even if it's just an inexpensive composition notebook from the store and a basic number 2 pencil, you have what you need to nature journal. I do also recommend at least having some colored pencils or something to color in with, as being able to study the color of your object brings more depth and dimension to it. So don't feel like you have to go out and buy a bunch of material or professional grade items. You can start very simply with pencil, notebook, and some colored pencils and be on your way. Having said that, today for the tutorial, I'll walk you through some of the items that I have and some product recommendations. Not because I make any money off of this, but because these are products that I use myself and have had good success with. So because I tend to watercolor my journals, I like to have a thicker watercolor paper. So here are 2 different types of journals. This is a Strathmore 400 series notebook. It has watercolor paper in it that is thick enough to handle both marker and colored pencil and watercolor. So it performs really well, and I like that it lays flat also. So that can be convenient if you are doing field work and you'd like to be able to fold your pages back. So Strathmore 400 series multimedia journal is a great option. Today, I will be working with another favorite of mine, which is the Strathmore Watercolor Travel Journal. I really like this as a watercolorist because the pages are 100% cotton, and cotton is really what performs best with watercolor. So I do recommend this particular journal, and this is what I will be painting and drawing in today. In addition to what you'll be putting your pictures and drawings and notes on, you'll need something to do with that with. So any pencil will do. I like to have an architect's mechanical pencil just for precision. And I also use a Pigma Micron pen. This will be the pen that you use to outline your shapes if you like to do so. I like to use this to give the lines definition and really make my illustrations pop. So Micron pens, the most important thing is that you find a brand of black ink that will not be water soluble, so that it doesn't smudge when you add your watercolors. In terms of the watercolor, there are several options out there. If all you have is Crayola brand, that is fine. You can totally start with that. I often tell people there is no problem using kids' art supplies to start off your journey. So use whatever is available. Here are a couple of options. This is a Winsor & Newton Cotman palette. It's a student grade palette, but it's nice and small and travel proof, and it actually does come with a little mini brush. I just don't have it in here today. And a lot of artists like these colored pencils that are water soluble, so a watercolor pencil. And these are also great for taking into the field if you want to quickly sketch and color in and then return home perhaps to do the watercoloring. So these are Faber-Castell, but this is another great field option. Today, I will be working out of the Prima Confections. This is called the Classics. This is a really quality watercolor set for beginners. I think it has a good middle of the road price point. It's got a great palette of all the colors you would need to mix pretty much anything you would need to paint. So I like this palette, and this will be the one that I use today. And what would watercolor be without brushes? Again, brand is less important, but in terms of general purpose use, I like to have a round 6 brush and a round 2 brush. So synthetic squirrel hair is both a cruelty-free option and a good one for watercoloring. So that would be my recommendation as well. And I also have a round 4 here today, as I like to have a couple of size options as well. But again, whatever you can get your hands on will work. Of course, water for our watercoloring. And another great thing I like to have on hand, especially for something what we're doing today, a small study where we're doing it in the studio and not necessarily out in the field, is a magnifying glass, because it just is going to allow you to see really small details good. And you can find these very easily online. Pretty much anywhere. Just some student grade magnifying glasses is helpful for recording what you are looking at and making observations. And last but not least, just a little bit of towel to wipe your brushes on as you paint, as well as perhaps a paper towel nearby for some blotting. So this is about all that you need to get started with watercoloring. And again, you can use the more basic materials to get started, but here is just a general idea of what we'll be using today and what I like to use. So as we begin to think about making our observations today for our journal, I like to start by just simply observing the object and whatever it is that you've decided to study that day. And of course, today we have these delightful maple seeds. And there are 3 prompts that are basically the main drivers of nature journaling. And those 3 prompts to keep in mind as you're making your observations are: I notice, I wonder, and it reminds me of. So as you're looking at your object and you're noting things, you're thinking of those 3 prompts in your mind, and you're sort of rolling them over and meditating on them as the thing you're studying kind of starts to reveal itself to you. And so today I'll just start by kind of stream of thought, just going through how I approach something like this and what I noticed. And just by the first fact that this morning when I looked out my window, my whole deck was covered in these beauties. And I have to admit, the first thing I thought about was my roof, because it had just been redone, and in the process of redoing our roof, they had to remove the gutter guards. And all I could think about was how all of these lovely little joys were going to be clogging up my gutter guards and causing me trouble. But it also made me stop and think about how self-centered that was, and how it really wasn't considering the tree and the tree's life and what the tree is doing in its own time and space. And so I thought this would make a really great thing to nature journal, so that I could help myself not have those thoughts and perhaps grow closer and in better community with that tree, instead of seeing it as a nuisance. Now, many people do see these little guys as a nuisance. They clog your gutters, they get all over your yard, then you'll have tiny maple sproutlings everywhere. But to the average gardener, they may be a bit troublesome. But let's take some time today to just appreciate them for what they are, and for the beauty that they behold for what they are in and of themselves. So of interest, I actually did a nature journal prompt back in the end of February on maple buds themselves, and you can see that journal entry here. And so another good way to continue your nature journaling journey is to study the same thing over time. So as the seasons change, it's always interesting to go back and see how things have changed as you've been noticing, and do entries on the same item or the same object and see how they've changed over time. So this is what these maple buds looked like when they fell off the trees back in February. And as you can see, things are quite different now. This is what one of those buds would have looked like. I'll try to get some light on it there. Might be a little difficult to see because of the camera, but here we go. You can see some interesting observations about this. I noticed that from the very insides of each of all those tiny little buds that I've drawn pictures of from the end of February now shoots out these stem-like objects. And you can see here that's still attached is one of the seed pods that is obviously in duplicate, right? They're doubled and they join together at the end of these stems. Now the rest have fallen off, only the one remains. And inside there is just a tiny bit of the remains of the dried buds that would have been really vibrant and very thick and moist and contain these seed buds inside of them earlier, just a few months ago. So I think that's really cool. And when I'm looking at that, it reminds me of party blowers, like the things that kids have at parties, and they blow it and the little doodads blow out as they blow it. So that's the thing that it's reminding me of at this moment. And so I do notice too that some of the stems are kind of a pinkish color while others are more green. So I'm not sure what the significance of that is. And this does appear to be the distal end of the branch. So the very end part of the branch has fallen off onto my deck here in totality. And then for the actual seeds themselves, here are a couple of individual ones. And certainly what I noticed too about these is that one of them has a pinkish cast, almost like a pink purple cast, whereas the other one is just green. And so that makes me wonder, you know, what's the significance of that? Like, why do some have this sort of pinkish cast to them and the other one is more of a green? Now, I will say as well that behind me I have a lot of different maple trees. So it's also entirely possible that these came from different trees. I don't know whether these came off of the same tree or not, but I did take them both off of my back deck. And so we'll just grab one of them and I'll see if I can sort of bring this down a little bit and get a good look at it. I can see all these really cool, like tiny ridges. Oh, that's so neat. And they're so delicate. It reminds me of capillaries, like bloodstream, your veins in your body. It's so cool. And they all go sort of in the same direction. So they almost have like a branch-like structure. And if I hold it like this, it sort of reminds me of looking at a tree growing out of the ground. Like if this is the trunk and these are the branches. So I'm not sure what the functionality of these fine little vein-like structures is. I might even be able to, let's see. Oh, there we go. Yeah, maybe get an idea. A little bit more detail here. Hard to capture on the camera, but yeah, you can also study that more intensely and see how they branch out a little bit more. So I'm not sure whether those are designed when the seed pod falls into the ground to draw in moisture and nutrients and take it to the seed, or if they have some other function. I don't really know. So that's sort of my I wonder what the functionality of all those little vein-like structures are. And of course, I don't know about you, but these remind me of a helicopter blade because that's what I grew up calling them, helicopters. I've heard people call them twirlies and all kinds of other stuff, but it does remind me of a helicopter. And as they fall, they have a very helicopter-ish round circular pattern. So that makes me wonder about how that works in terms of its distribution and how the seeds would be fluttering away, perhaps so that they don't grow too crowded. And that they wouldn't be competing for the nutrients of the parent plant. So giving seeds a way to get further away from where they come helps prevent overcrowding. So those are just some really preliminary things that I'm noticing right now. And what will happen is as I'm drawing and noticing more details and painting, more of those kinds of ideas will come to mind, and I'll keep thinking about those 3 prompts. You know, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, and I'll make more notes. Now you can always make preliminary notes in your notebook first if you'd like, and then add them later after you've done your drawing and sort of had time to really sit with your item and really think about it and just really sort of take it in and take in all the details. So having done a preliminary assessment of what we're looking at, let's go ahead and get started. I'll start off by breaking down whatever my subject is into its most basic shapes. So for these seeds, I noticed that there are essentially 2 ovals that make up the main shape of the seed pod. There's a smaller oval for the seed itself, and then a larger oval that is the shape of this sort of thin, papery winged part. The seed has sort of a football or eyeball shape to it, so I will add that in. And then just simply connect the 2 ovals together to create the basic form and shape of the entire seed. Now I'll just erase some of those first lines, those ovals, just to clean the picture up a little bit. And then I'll begin working on the veins. As you can see, with this, I'm not trying to strive for a totally accurate reproduction of the seed, but I'm just trying to get the main impression of what's going on here. And for me, that means the spacing of the veins, noticing how close or far away they are at different points on the seed pod. So they do tend to go a little further away from each other by the edges and are closer together, closer to the seed itself. So I want to communicate that the best I can in my drawing here today. And that'll also add some value. And value is simply the lightness or darkness of something. It has to do with how the light is hitting a subject. So now I'll go in with my Micron pen, now that I'm happy with the underlying sketch, and I'll just start to outline it and maybe add a few extra details. I see there's a couple of notches at points in the seed pod, so I've added those. And I'll begin to add more detail to each of those veins as well. And that means that I notice there's a little bit of a darker value closer to the seed itself. So, and don't forget the veins that actually go over top of the seed. Can't quite see them in the photo here, but they are there. And then I'll add a couple of extra branches off of there. And finally, erase my pencil marks from underneath, which you can do once your ink is dry, and put a few final touches on the seed pod by adding a little bit more depth and dimension around that darkest part that is on the edge of the seed, where all of the veins come out from closer together at one point. And there you have it. You have just drawn your maple seed. Now it's time to lay out your actual nature journal page. So now that I've showed you up close how to draw these seeds, I'm gonna show you how I do it on my journal itself and how the page will be laid out. I've decided for this particular entry that I'd like to have a drawing of the seed to scale. So I've measured it and put a line and put that it is about 2 inches long, just for reference, and try to draw one that is more accurate to the size of the seed as is. Now, because I won't be able to get as many details on a small drawing, I am also going to draw this in a bigger scale so that I can capture a little bit more of the depth of the colors and of the nuances of the seed itself. So I've decided I will do both of these on the same page and give some space in between them. When I'm thinking about laying out a page, I'm also considering where I want my title and eventually where I want my text to be and what kind of information I'm going to be including on the page. Sometimes people like to label their specimens or their subjects. I do that on occasion. I'm not sure that I'll do it today, but I do like to think ahead of time about where I'm going to be placing my writing. So you'll see, I'll just go through the same process I already showed you to draw the 2 different types of seed pods. As I'm drawing this and I'm thinking about all these tiny little veins, even with the blown up version of this seed, the larger scale picture, I just can't quite capture the complexity of these amazing veins on this pod. And so as I'm looking at it with my magnifying glass, I've decided I need to take it just one more step further on the magnification. And so I like to call this my microscope technique. I've just grabbed a round object that I have handy on my desk, and I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm going to do an even further zoomed in portion to show the fine details of those veins. I like to use this technique when I've got a particularly complex subject or a really fine, tiny repeating pattern that would just be too much to try to do in its entirety. So think of this as a microscope that's been zoomed in on a tiny little section of this leaf. And so in that small little microscope cross section, I'm going to draw the veins in a little bit more detail. Again, not necessarily striving to be picture perfect from what I see because there's just too many of them, but to get the general idea and convey the message of the complexity of how these veins are intertwined and overlapping and moving over and around each other. And as I'm drawing this, I'm thinking about how they remind me of rivers, and that they have branches coming off of them like little tributaries, like I would expect streams and rivers to have. And it's just really beautiful. It's becoming pretty meditative to draw them actually, and to just think about how amazing all these tiny little branches of these veins are. And now I'll just draw some lines so that I remember what part of the seed pod I was zooming in on. Now it's time to add some ink. We'll take that same Micron pen that we used earlier, and I'll start going over the details on top of my pencil sketch, which I will eventually erase. Another cool thing about using these waterproof Micron pens is that you could paint your subject first and then decide to add your ink second if you want. So I'm doing it first in this particular entry. I'm going to go over all of my lines with it and then maybe even add some details. Now you'll notice as well, while I was thinking about those tiny little veins again, I made a little note to myself so that I can remember some thoughts I was having as I enter my journal. Today I'm only going to use 3 colors for this work. I already have some old green paint left on my palette, and so I'm going to use that. That's another awesome part about watercolor, is that you can reconstitute it and just bring it right back to life. So yeah, just add some water as I'm doing here, and voila, I can reuse the green that I've always had. I almost always have some green left on my palette. And I'm also going to use a little bit of a pink. It looks really bright in the palette, but the cool thing about color theory is that you can neutralize colors, and pink and green actually neutralize each other. So if I want more of an olive green, I can add a touch of pink. And if I want my pink to be less bright, I can add a small amount of green. So you'll see me doing that and working back and forth until I have a shade that I think is muted enough for nature, because sometimes the colors in nature aren't quite as bright. Now maybe if you're doing a really bright flower, you might have that, but today the colors are a bit more muted. So I am doing what I just said there. I added a little green to my pink to neutralize it, so it's more of like a really soft color. I'm even going to pull in just a tiny bit of old blue to make it really neutral. And I'm going to start with my initial washes. So the wash that you put down first on watercolor should be very thin. It should be mostly water and not a lot of pigment. The beauty of watercolor is that you layer it and it's transparent. So you work in these fine transparent layers, and it's awesome for doing nature subjects because then you can really get to sort of the nuances of color that you find in nature. Like I'm picking up on all these different sort of greens and pinks and a little brown and purple in these seed pods, and watercolor is just fantastic for picking up on those things. So this first wash that I'm laying down is almost all water and just a little bit of thin pigment, so I can lay sort of a color foundation for where I want to go later on when I add more color to this subject. this point, I'm going in, and even though my seeds are still a little wet and damp, I'm going to mix in just a little bit more color to add some values. This is called the wet in wet technique. You can add paint while it is still wet to help it blend and move together, and it produces some really cool color gradients. So the only thing you have to be careful of when you're doing wet and wet is that you don't overdo it and you add too much water, or else you get sort of this waterlogged paper and splotches, and it's just a little rough. At this point, I'm going to take a different seed, not one of my model seeds since there's so many, and I just thought I would see what is going on underneath this outer shell or this outer casing. And I've quickly taken it apart here. There is another membrane on the outside of this tiny seed, sort of thin and brown. So I'm going to try to see if I can just sort of gently peel that off and see what is underneath that. I'm trying also not to harm the seed necessarily. Not sure whether this is something I'll end up putting on the journal page, but I'm going to try to preserve the seed. And there you can see I've opened it up, and that, my friends, is the embryo of a tree. Up close in all of its beauty, and everything in there is someday going to turn into this, which is pretty incredible when you think about it that way. Now that I've let my watercolor dry, I'm going to add a second layer on top just to deepen some of the values and colors to create a little more depth and to achieve a little more accuracy with the colors that I'm seeing now. One of those seed pods has more of the purplish, pinkish tone, and the other one has a little bit of pink but is mostly green. So I've mixed a bit of blue in with my pink, my muted pink, to make sort of a muted purple, and that is what I am adding to this top seedling here. You'll notice as well that I'm not adding a lot of paint. We're talking really tiny amounts, and I'm blotting my brush off a lot on that towel over there. One of the hardest things to learn about watercolor is water control, and so don't be frustrated with yourself in the beginning if you find that you're getting too watery or too much paint or pigment on your brush. You can always blot it off, so that's why I always keep a towel handy next to me so that I can continually be blotting a little bit of paint or water off my brush in order to achieve the right consistency. And because these are fairly small paintings, I'm not using a ton of pigment or water on my brush at this time. Continue to work back and forth with those pinks and greens and some purple, just always checking against my little model seedlings for colors. So I'll work back and forth between sort of a rusty colored peach and a brown and a green, and then add in more purple as well. I may switch brushes. You'll see on the top seed is a lot smaller, so I'll use my smaller round 2 brush to get some of the finer details in that seed. So just feel free always to work back and forth between brushes and colors in order to get the level of detail that you're hoping to achieve. Now I'm going to turn to my little microscope section, the cross section of the finer details of the veins, and mix a darker brown color to create the shades, because these veins they're tubular, so they have a 3-dimensional feel. Again, so I don't get lost in too many details, I'm just going to keep it fairly simple and just give the outer edge of each one a little bit of a shadow side, and that'll help convey that these are tubular in nature. They have sort of a rounded cylindrical shape. it can be easy to overwork or overthink these things, but the good news is the human brain fills in a lot of gaps in art. So don't stress too much about every single line and detail, because anyone looking at your painting will be able to recognize what it is if you've given them enough information. So don't stress about all the tiniest of details and just try to communicate what you're hoping to show in your drawing. Once your painting is dry, you can create a heading for your page. I like to just say the name of whatever it is I've been drawing or painting, and I always put the date as well so I can remember when I collected this specimen. You can include any number of details about the location, the temperature, the weather, and whatever suits you and whatever you're trying to convey in your page. So this is personally stylistic. You can do fancy letters, you can just leave it go all entirely. It's totally up to you. That's the beauty of this as well. It's your journal, you're the artist, and you get to make all the decisions about how you'd like it to look. And now it's time to record your thoughts and observations. I'll read you what I wrote. Today, my deck is covered with these. At first, all I could do was groan. No more gutter guards equals clogged gutters. But it's not always about me or us, is it? So I've sought to unlock the magic of this tiny world. I wonder why some are green and some are more pink purple. Of course, they remind me of helicopters. Doesn't everyone call them that? But what I noticed most are the intricate network of tiny vessels that each seed pod contains. With a magnifying glass, the vessels are stunning. They first reminded me of river tributaries, the way they branch off. As I drew the tangle of vessels, it was as if I could see an entire forest coming to life, all contained within one small seed. Talk about cosmic awe. I wonder, what is the function of these vessels? And there we have it. A completed nature journal page on a maple seed. Let's take a little zoomed in look at how it turned out. I hope you've enjoyed this video and can now see yourself as the kind of person who engages in a nature journaling practice. I hope it's showed you how it can draw you into compassionate understanding and awe and fascination and wonder with all of creation around you. And to help remind us, as I reminded myself in this journal, it's not always about me or us, is it? Grace and peace to you. Thank you for joining me.